Hey everyone, and welcome to Backseat Sports. I'm Josh and this is Caleb, and guys, we are covering the situation at Nebraska right now. Is Mike Riley going to be fired? Will he be fired? What's going on with Shawn Eichorst? Is Nebraska in the tank right now? What's happening with the Cornhuskers?
We're going to talk about the Northern Illinois loss, and oh man, was that a shocker. Nobody was expecting it. Nobody at Memorial Stadium. I thought it was a cupcake game. We're just going to breeze on by into Big Ten play and another easy game with Rutgers. But oh, how the tables have turned so quickly. It's just shaky ground for Mike Riley and the Huskers from here. Confidence is shaken. Just so many question marks now.
Question in all Husker fans' minds is, if we can't beat Northern Illinois, who can we beat? Rutgers looks like a somewhat challenging game now. At Illinois looks like a tough game. I mean, Wisconsin and Ohio State look like unconquerable obstacles right now. And when you're looking at Northwestern at home and games like at Minnesota and Iowa at home, Nebraska's record is definitely in question at this point. Can we even make a bowl game? That reality has kind of hit Husker Nation right now. It might be difficult for us to make a bowl game with back-to-back losses, starting out 1-2 on the season for the third time in Nebraska history, twice in the last 3 years. Definitely a lot of question marks heading into Big Ten play.
Now we're going to have to just do an assessment of the facts of what Mike Riley has brought to the table thus far with just an unacceptable loss. I mean, that is just unexcusable. Nebraska should never lose to Northern Illinois. That's pretty clear. So now we're going to have to take a serious, hard look at Mike Riley and what he's brought to the table over the last 2.25 years thus far. So his win percentage right now at Nebraska is 55.2%. That's not good. To say the least.
Not at all. Not at all.
And just looking at the record and what we have left, I don't think it's going to get any better. Dreaded Callahan era, he was 55.1%. We as a program promised to make the jump, right? Eichorst said this is about winning championships. This is why we made this hire. And we went from Bo Pelini, who was 38-17 just in conference alone, so 69%, and won, over 70% of his games, and then we drop down 15% from that.
Both of us don't think that Mike Riley should be fired during the season. I don't think it's not a good look for any program to fire a coach during the season. It looks bad for recruits. It looks bad just in general in the perception of all fans across the country. It's a big hassle, especially when it comes to the transition of who's going to be the interim head coach, things like that. We should at least give Riley the chance to prove himself throughout Big Ten play against Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State. Those challenges, see if we can beat Iowa at home at the end of the year. And we need to be able to see at least if we can make a bowl game. It obviously does make a difference. That was the big news last week, was that Shawn Eichorst announced an extension for Mike Riley into 2020. This season, Mike Riley's making about $2.9 million, but by 2020, he'll be making $3.2 million, a little bit of a raise in that time. Immediately after the extension, we lose to Northern Illinois, and both Eichorst and Riley are in some pretty hot water. CoachesHotSeat.com has Mike Riley as the second hottest seat in college football. It's a big issue for the Cornhuskers, for Mike Riley, and for Shawn Eichorst. Coaching transitions are never easy, and I don't think anybody wants to see coaching transitions in a program. It always delays for the process of getting better and getting back to what you want to be, but sometimes changes are necessary.
A lot of people say, well, if you only give a coach 3 years, it's going to make your program less desirable because you don't have that job security. I don't truly buy that as a whole, because I think coaches know that going in, programs expect results. And so you to have a long tenured career must be successful or else you're out. But the tough thing is with recruits, just having 5 years have 3 coaches, that's a tough thing to do, just because, so many different schemes, plans, the identity is totally kind of stripped from the Huskers for players. And it's like, do I want to go there if there's going to be another coach? So I think it's harder on the recruiting side and the player side. You going to a program and committing to a coach that you wanted to play for, and then all of that switching and changing on you is tough for sure.
When it comes to quick turnarounds, just in the last few years, the NCAA has seen big-time programs U-turn within just a year or two after signing a new head coach. Penn State hires James Franklin after all the allegations with Jerry Sandusky, with all the sanctions that were brought down upon them, the near-death sentence by the NCAA, and they're now an elite program once again. You have USC after the Reggie Bush incident. Now they're back to being a top 5 program. Oklahoma tanked for a little bit near the end of Bob Stoops' tenure. They hire Lincoln Riley. Now they're back to contention. Washington with Chris Peterson. They hire him within 2 years, are an elite program once again. And Wisconsin, we saw that with Paul Chryst. After a rough season, they fire their coach, hire Paul Chryst, and again, great season.
So the question, is it possible to win with Nebraska fast after a turn? And I say yes, absolutely. If you get the right person in there, it can definitely happen and happen fast. And I think, as we've seen from most programs, when you get a great coach, it does happen fast. It is this fast turnaround. Nebraska is not devoid of talent or skill at many levels and with our players. If you have a coach who can really max the limit and max the potential and put all the pieces in the right places, I mean, it is hard to win, but not for them.
Yeah, a lot of people think that Nebraska should just be content with winning 8, 9, maybe if you're lucky 10 games. Because we're Nebraska, you know, we're not supposed to be good anymore. We're past our prime. Don't talk about the old days, whatever. But when I look at teams like Wisconsin, Penn State, Oklahoma, Washington, even Iowa had a 12-0 regular season just a few years ago. I don't think Nebraska should be content with just being an okay average team. Even though we may not have the recruits within 200, 300 miles of the other teams like Alabama or like USC do, there's no excuse when we have the facilities, the fan base, and the tradition. We should be able to recruit pretty well nonetheless. No coach should be worried about our recruiting situation, even in the Midwest.
We were terrible in the 50s. We were absolutely awful. We had not gone to a bowl game like since the Rose Bowl. And then it took Bob Diaco to bring us out of that, go win the Gotham Bowl, and then beat Bear Bryant in the national championship.
Yeah.
And all it does is take a great coach, and obviously he was an amazing recruiter.
We will be talking about if we think Mike Riley actually will be fired at the end of this video. But right now we want to cover, in the case that Mike Riley is fired, who is there available to hire, who would be the right hire, and who are the options Nebraska has to hire. But then once again, before that, we have to actually acknowledge what other jobs could open up in the NCAA that could take away some of those elite coaching options from Nebraska. Right now, Kevin Sumlin at A&M, Texas A&M, is in hot water, as well as Brian Kelly from Notre Dame. And then you also got Ed Ogeron at LSU, Jim Mora at UCLA, and Butch Jones at Tennessee. All those guys right now potentially could be fired at the end of the year. More than likely, you'd expect 2 or 3 of them will be fired. And those programs debatably are better jobs than Nebraska at this point. The situation Nebraska's in right now, and like we said earlier, with the trouble that coaches can have with location when it comes to recruiting, sometimes it's not the most attractive thing to coaches, and those jobs could take away some options from Nebraska. But nonetheless, we need to look at who's available, who potentially could be there, and who would be a good fit for Nebraska. The only other thing would be, another thing is if Riley gets fired, would we keep Keith Williams? Would we keep Bob Diaco? What guys on the staff would currently stay? Those two probably seem like the most logical candidates. Keith Williams has done a great job recruiting. Our receiving corps has been pretty exciting. He has a lot of young guys there. And then Bob Diaco, of course, we just gave him a pretty big contract. I think it's reasonable to give him some more time with some of his own guys as well. Those would be guys that would be reasonable to carry along, but might make it a little bit tougher when it comes to a new coach search.
We would love to hear who you think would be the best option. And even if it's not on our list, we'd love to hear down in the comments below, who do you think should Nebraska hire if we fire Mike Riley at the end of the season? So first one to start off with is Les Miles. He's been on the news a lot recently. He called the last Husker game at NIU. His son plays here as a fullback. Ben, there was a lot of talk and hype about Les Miles coming out of retirement and coming to coach Nebraska. He's one of those guys, again, who's actually won a national championship, which there's very few of. A lot different situation than at Nebraska, but obviously with his big name, his eccentric personality, he could be a good fit. One of the concerns, though, with Les Miles is he is older. He is gonna turn 64, so he's about the same age as Mike Riley. Definitely not a young guy anymore. He's been around the block a few times, which is a good thing, but also with how long he can coach and the longevity of that is definitely in question. End of the day, we want somebody stable who can coach here for a long period of time.
In the case that Shawn Eichorst is still there and has to make this decision, I don't see a reason why that he would hire Les Miles at his age, considering he hired Mike Riley already, and I think you'd want to go a different direction, a younger and more energetic, fiery coach than an older Les Miles. Obviously, the name that everyone's been throwing around for years now is Scott Frost, the old coordinator at Oregon during the Chip Kelly days, and then now the head coach at UCF, who's done a pretty good job down there. He's an old-time Husker. He knows his quarterbacks. He knows how to run an offense. He's the type of guy that I think Nebraskans would love to have around, that respects the game. The question is whether or not he actually wants to come here, because it seems like he's had opportunities to come in the past but hasn't, and whether or not we'd be comfortable with the amount of experience he has as a head coach and the type of offense and defense that he wants to run in general.
Tom Osborne really has a lot of support of him. I think if they asked, Tom today, do you think Scott could be the guy? I would probably say he'd say yes. His opinion does hold a lot of weight, obviously, because he just went down there and helped him recruit down at UCF. Tom does have a hand in that. Innovation is definitely a good thing, and obviously Scott Frost has showed that. I think football as a whole is always evolving, and I think somebody who can be on top of that and bring in new fresh ideas is extremely important.
Scott Frost seems to be the most likely candidate at this point. He just seems most reasonably connected to Nebraska and all. A few other candidates that people have been throwing around just a little bit already. One is Gary Patterson from TCU. He's been pretty successful turning that program around from a dumpster fire into a fairly respectable, well-versed program down there. I think he's done a good job. He's well respected. But the biggest issue for him is that his contract is $4.7 million already down at TCU. So what would you have to pay him to leave the Big 12, leave Texas, and come up to Nebraska? I don't know if it's something that Nebraska is willing to do, but his coaching style and his mentality seems to fit Nebraska very well, and it could be a great pairing for the Huskers.
The next guy is Dan Mullen at Mississippi State, another guy who just turned around a program. That's a wonderful thing. Obviously something that the Huskers need. Again, does he want to leave the SEC? Does he want to leave Mississippi? The big question.
One of the final guys that we're going to highlight is Brent Venables. He's the defensive coordinator for Clemson right now. Obviously extremely successful, but with his experience and the type of defense he wants to run, in a lot of ways I think Nebraska fans want to bring back the black shirts, the definition of what Nebraska is: tough, hard-hitting, energetic, and absolutely unstoppable defenses, and he might be able to do that. It would be interesting to see if we could actually have an elite defense once again, and it'd be fun to give a guy like that a chance.
The interesting thing is, does Nebraska want to try that again after, obviously, Bo Pelini being the defensive
coordinator from the
at
SEC.
LSU, and then to transfer him up again,
and have one from the ACC here,
So to do the kind of repeat the same thing again, do you want to take another chance? Now we're to the question: does Josh and I, do we think that Mike Riley will be fired after this season? And then tied along with that, let's reevaluate what we think the final record's going to be at Nebraska now that we've seen 3 games.
Personally, like I said, I just don't see Mike Riley getting fired. The only way I could see Mike Riley getting fired is if Shawn Eichorst first gets fired, and then I still think Mike Riley will actually get one more year. I think with the contract that he currently has, with the extension that Eichorst just gave him, 2 more years seems pretty reasonable. It depends how this year goes. If, say, we only win 4 games this year, then it might be time to get him out of town, unfortunately. I really don't want to see Nebraska go through another coaching change, but if a team only wins 4 games, you might have to do that.
It's tough to say. Like Josh said, if Eichorst gets fired as an athletic director coming in, don't you want to get a feel for the team first and see what you need to do and evaluate for yourself? Obviously, that's a tough position to just go in, fire that coach right away, and then bring in your guy. We do win, like Josh said, 3, 4, maybe even 5 games. Don't get to a bowl game. It's going to be hard for anyone to say, yeah, let's keep Mike Riley for another season.
The few variables really are what coaches are interested in a job. If, say, Shawn Eichorst is still around, if he's talking with other coaches a little bit, is Gary Patterson interested? Is Les Miles interested? Does Scott Frost want to be the head coach in Nebraska? It really just depends, and as well as what other jobs open up around the country. Does Brian Kelly still at Notre Dame? Is Jim Moore at UCLA? Butch Jones at Tennessee? Who knows? Those are the variables you have to look out for. We'll keep on a lookout for him throughout the year, but right now I would lean towards Mike Riley at least has 1 more year left.
I personally think that Mike Riley will get fired after the end of the season, and that kind of has to go along with what I think is going to happen through how the rest of the season is going to shake up. That leads us to predictions. I don't think we'll get to 6 games. I could see us winning a miracle game like we did Mike Riley's first year against Michigan State. I still think our team is still talented enough. We have, a bunch of great guys on our team. I can't believe I might cut my original prediction in half. It's kind of crazy.
Personally, I think our season will come down to the final game of the year against Iowa. That'll be to make a bowl game or not make a bowl game, unfortunately. It just doesn't seem like we have any firepower to beat Wisconsin or Ohio State or Penn State at this point. And then it's going to come down to some, like Caleb said, 50-50 games with Northwestern, Iowa. Even, at Minnesota won't be a pushover. And that's assuming that we beat Rutgers, we beat Illinois. and we beat Purdue.
We'd love to hear what you have to say. I mean, is Nebraska going to make just an insane turnaround? Are we just going to win 9 games in a row, win the, go to the conference championship? What do you guys personally think is going to happen? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Will Mike Riley stay around another year? Just want to start the conversation, see how the pulse of Husker Nation, what everybody's thinking. All right, thanks guys for joining us. As always, if you like this video, like, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And as always, I'm Caleb, he's Josh. This has been Backseat Sports, and we'll see you next video.
See ya. Hey everyone, and welcome to Backseat Sports. I'm Josh, and this is Caleb. Obviously, we'll get this out of the way. We're not in the same room. I know. I'm out in Ohio. He's out in Nebraska. But we're making this because we're diehard Husker fans, and we want